Welcome to the conversation presented by the New York State Writers Institute at the University of Albany. My name is Paul Grondahl. I'm the director of the Writers Institute. Very excited for today's guest, Marion Roach Smith. But before we get to the conversation, I'd remind you that this and all of our author interviews are archived on our YouTube channel, which is NYS Writers Institute. You can also follow everything on our website, nyswritersinstitute.org. And I would encourage you to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And if you like this kind of programming and want to support it in the future, you could make a donation at nyswritersinstitute.org. Now, I'm very excited today. A longtime friend and colleague, a supporter of the Writers Institute, Marion Roach Smith. She's an author, a memoir coach, a teacher of memoir writing, a podcaster, and so much more. She's the author of several books, including one we'll talk about a lot today, The Memoir Project, a thoroughly non-standardized text on writing and life. Welcome, Marion.
Hi, Paul. It's wonderful to be here. As you know, the New York State Writers Institute is my very favorite cultural that I get to benefit from and have benefited from for 30 years. I just love everything you do. So this is an honor. Thank you.
We're really grateful. You support us in so many ways. You've been on our stage interviewing some of the great writers that we bring in. You've led panel discussions. You've done so much, and we appreciate it. So I follow you on Instagram. I like when you post. You had a post this morning on one of your authors, and I want to talk. You've been teaching memoir for quite a while. You've earned a reputation as the best memoir coach in the region, the state, and beyond. This book is called The Clearing by Samantha Clark. What does it feel like when one of your students publishes a book?
Well, I think I have the stretch marks to prove the
It's
co-birthing
it's
of
like
some
giving
books.
birth, yes.
But not so much with this one. When this book came, when she contacted me, she lives in Scotland, contacted me via email, which is how this always happens. And she said, I'd like you to work with me on my book. And I was thrilled because her description of it was fascinating. But what happened was, when I read it the first time, I said to myself, you are in the presence of greatness. You are in the presence of one of the most beautiful stories you have ever had the honor to read. And it was one of those moments. And we worked together. And that was about 5 years ago. I thought about this book every single day since the day I read it. And I didn't hear much back from her. And then a few weeks ago, out of the blue, she sends this message. The book is coming out with Little Brown. And I just almost wept. It is one of the loveliest things to be able to see a book that you've worked on. In the last 2 weeks, I've received 3 books in the mail from
Wow.
people. And I'm up to close to 60 books that I've worked with that have been published. But this one by Samantha Clark is a remarkable small assignment. She was sent to clean out the house of her parents who had recently died. And in there, she discovered a great deal about the space between us and our possessions, between us and our memories. And she gives us a whole history of ether. She literally discusses the idea of ether and the history of what we think about it, and poses these questions about how we put space between us and where we need to be. And it's fascinating. I love this book. So
It's
how it feels
fantastic.
is, I don't know, great to see it.
So you're the midwife, you're the coach, it must be like seeing, your daughter walk across the stage at graduation too. It must be a beautiful
It is.
feeling. I mean,
Yeah, it is. It is similar. That's a great comparison. It feels very much like that. And I'm so proud of everybody. And I'm as proud of someone who self-publishes as I am with someone who publishes big. It's all about this is a goal. It's more than a dream. It's a goal. And to be able to be part of that is an honor.
so I assume your description of the quality of her writing in this story, she was not a beginning, not a novice writer. So talk about how you take a writer who's maybe never sat down at a keyboard versus someone like Samantha Clark, who must be an expert in a way. What do you do to those two different writers? A well versed writer versus somebody who doesn't know much about the process of writing.
It's a wonderful question. You meet people where they are. So Another book that I got just literally last night in the mail was written by somebody who had never written anything. And she's about to be published in June. And what we did with her, and I remember saying to her, reading her first opening paragraphs, they were very boiled down. She told the whole story in one paragraph, in the opening paragraph. There wasn't a lot more you could do if you do that, right?
Mm.
So I use my favorite Emily Dickinson quote with her, which I do with writers who write too tight. And I say, Emily says, I'll tell you how the sun rose, a ribbon at a time. And I try to get them to understand that those ribbons, we have to pull this apart and stitch together ribbons, but you've got to give me the whole ribbon. We've got to slow down and we've got to tell the story. So it depends on which Emily Dickinson quote I deploy, because Emily's my go-to guru on all things.
Yes.
But with some really experienced writers, still, we make them the same mistakes. You know this, you're a well-published author. We rush into things. We have our insecurities. We still face the blank page every day. So some things are very common. Some pieces of advice are very common. I tell people to build a bowl, not a plate, in the opening of a book. In other words, you need to give me something to gaze into and not just throw details at me that just skitter across a plate and don't resonate with me. I don't need someone's height, weight, age, and date of birth in the opening paragraph of a memoir. I can do nothing with that. I need you to build me a bowl. So some things are sort of universal, but the way you work with the beginning writer is to encourage the person, is to receive everything and find what works. You get more from a writer by telling them what works than you get by telling them what doesn't. And while I'm very, very clear about what isn't working, I always make sure to illuminate for the writer what does work. When you do that, you get more of that.
Right. So how many writers, you've been at it for decades, and I know you started at the Art Center in Troy, and now you've created this whole business, the Memoir Project. I would encourage everyone to go to your website, marionroachsmith.com, right?
MarionRoach.com.
marionroach.com. And it's got a lot of good, solid advice and suggestions, but how many have you worked with, do you think?
So we teach about 100 people a month in the classes. I've been at it for about 30 years. I taught at the Art Center for 21 years, and we taught over 1,000. I taught over 1,000 people there. These days, the numbers are really quite soaring. I realized the other day I looked into the back end of my website, and I've had more than a million views. So there's a lot of attention on memoir right now. As you know, it's a very popular genre. It's not going anywhere. Every once in a while, the New Yorker feels that they need to run that requisite piece. The Wall Street Journal tried to do it 2 weeks ago. The death of memoir. It's like, oh, stop it. I mean, if you look at, like, there are books that I keep on my desk. The classic slave narrative book which was compiled by Henry Louis Gates. Let us not forget that if not for these stories, we wouldn't have the stories of the disenfranchised. So memoir is not going anywhere. It's been around forever. Anne Frank is a memoir, but we have memoir that's, contemporary and wonderful. So it's going to keep coming. And I love the volume of people that are interested in it. So I would say thousands of people have come through the classes. I wrote that book, the Memoir Project book, so that I could build a business around it. I tried something different, and I think it's panned out. So it's a wonderful way. As you know, writing books can be tricky. And so this time I figured I'd try to build a business out of a book instead of the other way around.
So what did the pandemic year mean for both your business and the writers you work with in your own writing? I did see an article that memoir surged during the pandemic. People really felt like they wanted to be introspective. They had the time now to gather their thoughts. Did you see a change in this past year compared to all the other years?
Yeah, a real surge in business. I'm a long established business, so I wasn't, trying, like, as you know, at SUNY, suddenly people had to learn how to teach online. I've been teaching online for more than 7 years, and editing online and running classes online. And so what we had to do was record all my classes because the demand was so high. But more than that, what I found fascinating is how the subject matter changed. Similar to when There was that very high profile arrest that sort of kicked off Me Too when Harvey Weinstein was arrested. My
Right.
email box literally blew up with
Mm.
people who had never told their story of sex abuse. It then went completely quiet when Justice Kavanaugh was installed. People
Right.
felt unsafe. It was a remarkable thing to witness. The subject matter during COVID has changed. People are dealing with psychic break. People are dealing with being home. I just had a class last night. A woman pitched a hilarious book in which she's been, home with her kids. And let's just agree that that leads to some fairly amusing moments.
Yes. Yes.
So the subject matter will change depending on what's going on in the world. And
Right.
if you're going to do this, you have to be willing to be agile that way.
Right. So you're dealing with people who are bearing their souls in a lot of cases, sometimes revealing, deep buried secrets for the first time. How do you counsel them in ever pulling back, or do you say put it all out there? I mean, they may be putting out incidents that should be prosecuted in a criminal court. I mean, to
Absolutely.
what extent do you suggest maybe rein it in a little bit, that that's too graphic or too personal or too, you know, too dark and horrible? Or are there no limits to subject matter and to the extent of detail?
Yeah, first of all, not all memoir is a bummer. And
Right.
it's really important to remember that there's the great memoirs in which people laugh at themselves because they just need to learn to meditate because they're a
Mm.
little type A, and or they learn to love a dog, or they learn to love the garden that came with the house that they just bought. But when it comes to the dark and terrible, I always say to people, don't do this alone. Make sure you get some therapeutic help, because as you do this examination, you're going to learn what you really believe. And what you really believe may shock you. People who write books, I've handled an awful lot of books with sex abuse in it. And what people frequently learn, although not always, is that along with their privacy, their dignity, their physical boundaries, they lost their voice. And what the beauty of this book returns to them is that voice. So it is a remarkable thing to be part of. But we don't need relentless stories of sex abuse, relentless scenes. We need to know what happened, and you can handle it with a lighter touch and still inform us of the clever damage that's been done to you, right? Through the emotional or physical abuse. So in the same way with an alcoholism memoir, I only need to see one scene of you really stinking drunk to say,
Right.
you got a problem. If you
Right.
give me 29 scenes, I'm going to say, why? So
Right.
that, by the way, is Roscoe,
I
who is
saw Roscoe. Our Lily may make an entrance.
yeah,
That ear shake, she does that too.
that is Roscoe, named for a William Kennedy novel. Just want to go on
Of
record.
course.
For his 90th birthday, I named him named a dog after one of his books.
Nice.
But the content, you really need. It's not that we don't want to hear your story. It's that we get your information quickly. Readers are amazing people. They have astonishing memories, and they say to themselves, "Got it," and then they want you to move on. So
Mhm.
it's more like skimming stones over the top of a flat lake than it is giving me buckets of water, right? I
Right.
don't need to drown in your details. I need you to curate and to skim a stone over the top of and pick this, and this to tell me. Those are beads on an abacus that add up to what you're arguing. And all of memoir is an argument. You're arguing something, you're saying something, you're showing us what you know after what you've been through. That
Right.
voice is lost in abuse and can
Right.
be regained with expressing yourself. That's the message of that book, right? So it's a big obligation to be kind, but it's also an obligation not to give therapy. I don't give therapy. I
Right.
give opportunity to writing.
So a book like The Clearing, you describe it like it just astonished you. After hundreds and hundreds, does it feel like you've heard it all, or there's still constantly new stories, new variations that surprise you, or are there no more new surprises in the memoirs that you receive?
I think it's surprising every day, and that's what I love. I, for some reason, like to work without a net. I had a very good job at the New York Times for 6 years and quit against everybody's advice. I like this thrilling, not knowing what's going to come in the over the transom today. But no, you could line up 25 personal essays about one's first kiss, and they will not resemble each other at all. And the different writers will get into different problems, and they will also have different astonishing lines. So I never worry about duplication or boredom in this job. Quite the opposite. I'm constantly worried that I'm up to the task of
Right.
the honor of being given someone's story to try to get it right.
Right. And I've got your book. I've read your book. I've heard your presentations. You put a lot of your personal story into it too. So I want to go back to that early start to your career at the New York Times. What was that like? And both your parents were journalists too, as well, right?
Yeah, it's a real illness in my family, and I married one. My sister
I
was
know
the
your sister and your husband are,
sister
yes,
was the head of Martha Stewart Omni Media for
right,
years. She's now the gardening columnist of the New York Times, and my parents were both journalists. My father was a sports writer. My mother was a society columnist, as we used to call it. And to get a job at the New York Times straight out of college was just an astonishing honor. But there were all these entry level positions then. There were hundreds of them, well, there were thousands of them in the country at the time. So what happened to me is I got to the New York Times at 21 years old. My father died, and my mother, at 49 years old, exhibited symptoms of senility. And very shockingly, apparently, was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, but no one had ever heard of the illness,
right,
and no one had ever written about it. And I just happened to be in this damnedest place at the damnedest time and wrote a piece for the New York Times Magazine that really kind of introduced the topic to the popular culture. And I ended up on the Today Show the next day. I was in my mid-20s. It was an extraordinary thing to happen to a writer, but it taught me a lot about the value of telling one's tale. I was part of a national conversation that needed to be had, and it was an honor. It was very complicated as a young woman, because my mother lived for 15 years with that damn illness.
wow,
But out of it came a book by Houghton Mifflin, the introduction to lots of other books, a whole bunch of essays for NPR. I always give people this advice: start in your own backyard.
hmm,
I couldn't have been more surprised that that was the topic that, quote, launched my career.
right,
But if that's what you've got, this journalism ethic, go with what you've got.
right.
You don't have to look far when it comes to memoir.
I also want to your honest assessment of the Times culture in that period, because I think you were there around the time when those women gathered in a class action
Oh,
lawsuit
yeah.
against put. So was it just that there was no gender equality, or was it openly hostile to women? Was there sexual harassment in the workplace when you were there? I'm interested in a young woman at the New York Times in that era.
It was a very white male dominated place, and it was run by a person who was very autocratic, Abe Rosenthal. There was a night that I had years ago. Russell Baker visited the New York State Writers
Mm,
Institute, and I was out
yeah,
to dinner. What an honor to be
yeah.
out with Russell Baker and William Kennedy. And William Kennedy asked Russell Baker and me, what was Abe Rosenthal like? And I said something like, homophobic, anti-feminist. I started angry, difficult, impossible, and I said to Mr. Baker, did I leave anything out? He said, no, actually, you were too kind. So it was it was very much a highly charged, highly sexually charged environment. There was also, people drank in the newsroom. They smoked in the newsroom. It was something out of a much earlier time, but there weren't the rules that there are now, right?
Right.
And that's not to say that anybody's behavior should be forgiven, not at all. But absolutely, the class action suit that came out of the repression of women getting ahead was very much warranted. My sister and I both felt, she was at the Times at the time as well, we both felt that it was the absolute right thing to do. These days, there are far more job opportunities, but at the time, I felt that it was not a place for me. I really didn't like the office politics. I didn't like that you had to hitch your star to somebody to kind of go with them, and I really felt that the the women just didn't have a chance of success at that time.
Right.
Now, the great exception is Anna Quinlan, who was our
Yeah.
champion, right? We all loved Anna, and Anna went from being a Metro reporter who started at the Post to being the assistant Metro editor, I think, during the time I was there. to writing that spectacular column Life in the 30s.
Hmm.
So there were superstars who were women, and I would never want to discount that. But it was a tough place to work.
Right. The paper has changed, you know, dramatically as the country had. It's certainly opened a lot more opportunity for diversity and equity and inclusion, and the stories and the way it covers them have changed. Do you think it's a better paper now than when you were there? Some traditionalists think that the standards are a little more relaxed and it's more advocacy journalism now than the old, you know, so-called objective. But what do you feel? How you've read the Times your whole life, like I have, and what do you feel about how it is now compared to when you worked there?
I find it fascinating that in the lead of a news story, we can feel the presence of the writer. I find that to be an astonishing difference in terms of I was trained, you don't show up at all.
Right.
You know, even if you use a flashy adjective, you know, oh, wait a minute, you know, so there's a huge difference, but it's more inclusive and it is more participatory in its feeling. I think that the crime, and I do believe it's a tragedy of the New York Times, is that they don't have as many bureaus as they had worldwide. When I was there, there were bureaus everywhere.
Right.
There were, I mean, there was a bureau in Johannesburg and one in Kenya, and I mean in Nairobi, and there were bureaus everywhere. And I feel the real sense of loss of that as I turn to other news sources sometimes to find out what's going on in places that I've visited. But I like the style of the New York Times, and I like the fact that they're able to be agile. I think that they're going to survive despite what
Right.
Donald Trump said, you
Right.
know. I think that if we hadn't the truth that we have had in the last 5 years, we'd be in a very different, terrible hell right now. So I still worship at the Gray Lady every single day, and they deliver everything from my crossword to my truth.
Right. It's amazing. The Sunday print edition. I spread it out on the table, and my wife's like, "You're still reading that?" You know, 4 hours later, is like, I can't even get through in 4 hours, and they keep adding these special sections. It's phenomenal. But I also want to talk because you have also shifted in storytelling methods, as I've tried to do and as everyone's tried to do. I think the Daily is a great addition to the New York Times. I mean, beautifully produced, basically tap the expertise of their reporters. Now you started a podcast too. What interests you in the podcast format versus, you know, doing a traditional article in print or online?
I love the live conversation aspect of the podcast. And I love, as I said before, I love to work without a net. And I'll be recording a podcast today. And every Thursday, I literally get the crap scared out of me from this live, because that person may say anything. This may go anywhere. And I've read their books. It's called Qwerty. It's by, for, and about writers. But I'm interviewing some of the most astonishing writers. I'm reading their books. I'm reading their reviews. I interviewed an indigenous woman last week who's going to be live as of this Friday, the 2nd of April. And I'm reading a great deal of stuff that we should all be reading, I think, to prepare for that. Indigenous writers, for instance. There are many more than we're aware of. I love Louise Erdrich, but she's not the only one out there to read, right? So the podcast allows for that come and go, catch and release venue of question and answer, but it's live. So the stakes are very, very high. And I don't believe in just asking, you know, what happens next in your book? I want to talk about the writing. I want to talk about the struggle. I want to talk about the decisions that are made. I want the people listening, who are writers, to be able to benefit. So it's a particular inquiry that I'm pursuing.
Right. And let's talk about the Memoir Project. I think you've been revising it, updating it. How has it changed, and how has your approach to teaching memoir writing changed over these years?
So the book was first published about 11 years ago, and it was a great honor last year to be in conversation with my publisher. First, that the book has stayed in print this long and sells every quarter pretty much the same number of copies, to update it, you know, to be invited to update it. As you know perfectly well, what usually happens to books is they come out, they disappear.
Right.
And I've published 3 previous books. So this was a joy. And we updated it in many ways. First of all, there was old language. I referred to things like Blackberries. No one has a Blackberry anymore. And I referred to other online things that have just gone away.
Right.
But there was a real need to update the book structure aspect of it. I've learned a lot about structure working with all of these writers, and I wanted to emphasize that. And then I wanted to put some new essays in it, not take out any of the others. I just added, and there was one essay in particular that I've always wanted to publish, but I have never been able to finish. It was just too hard a topic, and it's in there now. And I'm very, very proud of that. It might be the hardest thing I've ever had to write. And it has to do with teaching people that memoir goes from here to there, from when you didn't know something to when you did. And I take a particularly short period time in my life when I was at my absolute worst, when I put my mother in a nursing home when she was 54, and I was behaving very, very badly in my life, to a there where I have answered the questions that I raise in this here essay, in this awful essay. And I become the person I had hoped to become and who my mother raised me to be. And when you show the writer that, you have to bare your soul. You have to show them what your here was, your worst.
Right.
And I think I do in this essay. I think it's pretty open.
Yeah. Wonderful. I look forward to, will that be released fairly soon?
Just got released. It's now,
okay.
if you order the Memoir Project, that's the edition you get, the new updated edition. It's really an honor to be able to update a book. It's my first experience with it. I hope I get to update it again in another 10 years.
That's great. So it's marionroach.com. You can go right there and find. We'll also include a link to purchasing the book from our local independent bookstore,
Thank you.
Market Block in Troy, and Book House in Stuyvesant Plaza. So let me ask, your own writing. Obviously, you're running a business. It takes a lot of time. You're also involved in a lot of board work and volunteer work. Do you have time for your own writing? And if so, does being a teacher improve your own writing? You know, since you're helping others write, does it actually help your own writing, or is it more of a challenge because you don't have the time or headspace to write like you used to when you didn't run a business?
It's not, I don't have as much time as I would like to have. You know, you and I have many mutual friends in people who write full time, Russell
Right.
Banks, William Kennedy, people but who also have families and have to work around those. And so I don't have as much time as I like. So what I do is I grid out my time so that I do set aside writing time every day. In the same way I teach my students, try to write 3 to 5 pages a day, 5 days a week. And so I still write a lot for the blog, in which I give instructional work for people to look at, and I enjoy that. As to the question of what my students teach me, pretty much everything. And the question, the moral issue is not to poach, right?
Mhm.
You don't ever want to say, wow, that is the best idea for a book, you know.
Right.
But every once in a while, they'll provoke me to think something. Well, every day, pretty much, they'll provoke me to think something new. And that's the benefit of it. These conversations are rich and wonderful, and I'm very grateful for them. But I think protecting writing time is the greatest single issue here. You know, you've got a
Right.
job. I'm sure you're working on a book because you're always working on a book, but finding the time,
Right.
always.
Right. Um, and how do you kind of decompress? I know you got Roscoe. I got what are you're a gardener too. I know your
I'm a
sister is
gardener.
a world-class gardener, but I know you garden. But what do you do to sort of step away, or is everything now virtual and you can't step away? Or
The garden is a good place, and exercise is a great place. I do a lot of exercise. I walk every morning with a friend of mine who's super duper smart, and she's always got issues. And we talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. And so friendship, and of course reading. I mean, the glory of it. The other night I was rereading for the 975th time, The Dog That Bit People by James Thurber, my single favorite personal essay ever, hands down. It makes me scream with laughter. Why? Oh, who knows? And
right,
you know, so that's my decompression a lot, is the joy of reading. I just finished Russell Banks' new novel, and damn, I mean, I
yeah,
held it to my heart afterwards and said, how did he do that?
Right.
And so I'll go back and try to figure it out. But I did send him a note saying, well, damn, that was perfect.
Yeah. It's amazing when you see that, and it's hard to pull off, but I know, you know, you read a lot as well. What else has the web? You have embraced the web early on. So when you were teaching at the Art Center, I assume almost all your students lived within 30, 40 miles or less. They had to drive. Now, I know you have international students. What has the web taught you about your reach, and what are the pros and cons versus teaching actually in person in a classroom?
Yeah, I loved the Art Center of the Capital Region. They gave me a chance. I had no teaching credentials when I started there, and the class became very popular. And then I wanted to diversify. I really did. I wanted to see what a more diverse audience might look like. And and I do have a worldwide audience. Where on depending on what day you look, I'm number one or number two if you type in memoir coach in Google.
Mm,
So worldwide, that's a pretty great status to be at, but it also attracts people from all over the world. So I was teaching a class the other night and we had people from Western Canada, South America. I had people in the Philippines. I had somebody in London, in the same class. So they're giving each other a global perspective. And that's going to help a lot because that's where we're going. I mean,
right,
that's where we are. I'm not sorry. We're not going there. That's where we are. Like it or not,
right.
people, guess what? We're living in a global economy. A global perspective is needed. And it's really helpful to have that on the call because it keeps people from just writing the same thematic, American centered, white dominated narrative, but to, open up their heads. So I love online. I also come in contact with writers from all over the world, as Samantha Clark proves from
Right,
Scotland. As people that I've worked with, I worked with somebody in Australia recently. So I'm all for it. Why not?
right,
Right? Let's share
right.
what we know. It's not my energy to keep. I'm supposed to share what I know. And if you can share it worldwide, well, wow.
Yeah. So I know you're also an excellent business person. You've grown this business. You impressed me with your organizational skills far better than my own. But what are your goals? Do you still have like a 5-year, 10-year? Do you want to franchise, the Memoir Project? Do you want to have 20 people working for you? Do you want to be like a master class, this kind of slick produced TV show almost, or are you where you want to be with this business?
It's such an important question. And it's one that we have to visit all the time as we build, just to be bigger, better, faster, smarter, and richer is not actually my goal. And so I have had to make those decisions. I'm not training a bunch of mini Marions to teach my method. I'm not interested in selling the business someday. That was a big decision I had to make
Hmm.
a few years ago, because one day I'm going to want to take the shingle down. It
Right.
started by putting up a shingle saying I would edit manuscripts, and it grew to be this worldwide business with many classes. I teach a class in the op-ed, I teach a class in the personal essay, I teach a class in how to structure a memoir. It goes on and on. I have a master class, and I'm always adding classes. But for me, selfishly, and this is just true, and you know this for yourself, I just wanted to have a conversation every day with other writers.
Right.
And when I first moved upstate, I went to SUNY. I took a graduate course in fiction writing. It was really kind of a remarkable experience. And I realized that that's what I was missing from my New York City life, where all my friends were writers. And so I started a business so that it would feed my own head. And here we
I
are.
I feel the same way. This is a perfect example. This is why I still like writing a weekly column for the Times Union. It's a continuing education. I learn something from all the people that I interact with. I've learned so much today. Our guest has been Marion Roach Smith. She is a great writer, memoir coach, friend and supporter of the Writers Institute, and somebody who has encouraged, nurtured, and helped publish dozens, hundreds of writers. Marion, this has been a great pleasure. Thanks for joining us today.
What an honor, Paul. Thank you so much.